You ever go looking for peace and accidentally find a war? Because that's what happened to me. I took an old army buddy up to my grandfather's cabin in the Arizona mountains hoping for quiet coffee and a couple days where nobody asked anything from either of us. And instead, I got a front row seat to what happens when a power-drunk HOA president decides the law is just a suggestion. The cabin sat where it always had, tucked into the pines above the ridge, far enough from town that the silence had its own sound. You could hear wind moving through the cedar, the creek working its way over stone, the boards on the porch giving a little groan when the evening cold settled in. That place had been in my family longer than most of the houses down below, had existed as ideas. My grandfather built it with his own hands. I'd reinforced it over the years, steel door, wraparound porch, generator, water intake from the stream. Nothing fancy, just solid, honest. The kind of place that minded its own business. Rick appreciated places like that. He rode up there with me in near silence, thermos in hand, staring out the passenger window while the truck bounced over gravel and dust. He still had that same hard look he wore back in our Army days, buzz-cut, straight-back eyes that never really stopped scanning. I asked him if he was going to survive a weekend without Wi-Fi, and he gave me that half-smile of his and said, "After Kabul, this'll feel like Disneyland." That was Rick. Never talked much, never explained much. All I really knew was he worked for some federal division out of D.C., and every time he said it like it was a joke with the punchline missing. But I'd known him over 20 years. If a man like that wanted to disappear into the woods for a few days, you didn't ask too many questions. You handed him coffee and let the mountain do its work. That first night was damn near perfect. We grilled venison behind the cabin, let the fire crackle down to coals, took turns lying about who'd been the better shot back in uniform. He won that argument, same as always. For a few hours, it felt like the world had finally run out of ways to be ridiculous. Then the next evening, right around sunset, headlights came crawling up my access trail. Silver Lexus. Too clean for the mountain, too confident too. Out stepped Karen Ashley's scarf-wrapped tight, clipboard in hand expression like she'd been appointed queen of the forest by God himself. She marched right up to the edge of my porch and barked my name like she was serving a warrant. I stayed in my chair and told her the same thing I'd told her before she was on private land and whatever fantasy government she ran downhill in Whisper Pines, it stopped at my property line. She didn't like that. Karen was one of those people who wore control the way other folks wear perfume. Whisper Pines Preserve had been built 2 years earlier, all cookie-cutter luxury cabins and solar roofs and fake rustic charm. She'd made herself president of the HOA and started acting like visual harmony with the forest gave her authority over anything with a tree on it. She'd sent letters before, sent a clipboard guy once. I'd sent him back down the trail so fast I'm pretty sure his loafers never recovered. This time she said I was harboring an unregistered guest and violating community standards. I looked at her, then at the second chair by the fire, then back at her, and I said, "You hear yourself when you talk, or is this all just for the clipboard?" She stiffened like I'd slapped her. Then she told me she'd be back with a formal order. I said I was looking forward to it. Rick watched the whole thing without saying much, just sipping coffee, eyes narrowed like he was studying a minefield. After she peeled out down the trail in a cloud of righteous dust, he muttered, "She's not done." "No," I said, "she's just getting warmed up." He was right. The next morning, Karen came back with reinforcements, 2 black SUVs, 3 security guys in matching uniforms, and enough fake authority to choke a mule. One vehicle had Whisper Pines Patrol stenciled on the side like they were auditioning for the world's saddest police drama. Karen strutted forward and started quoting some section of the HOA residency agreement about adjacent dwellings needing to submit guest records. Adjacent dwellings. Like my grandfather's cabin had somehow wandered into her subdivision by mistake. I told her slowly, clearly, that I was not in her HOA, never had been, never would be. Then Rick stepped off the porch. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. He just folded his arms and said, "Lady, this isn't Baghdad. You don't send armed patrols to somebody's home because you don't like the guest list." One of the guards puffed up at that hand, twitching near his belt, and Rick gave him a look so cold the man backed off without even realizing he'd done it. Karen demanded to know who Rick was. He said, "None of your business." That answer hit her harder than anything else. People like Karen can handle resistance. What they can't handle is mystery. She called the sheriff bluff. I told her to go ahead, and after a few more threats, she stormed off again, furious, humiliated, and clearly already planning the next move. That was the moment I knew it had gone from petty to personal. By afternoon, I was on the phone with the county assessor confirming my boundary lines for the second time, and then with the sheriff's office getting an incident logged. Rick, meanwhile, was walking the tree line like he was back in a combat zone. A couple hours later, he came back holding something small and metallic in his palm. A tracker, smooth cylindrical magnet mount. My stomach sank. He said it was probably slapped under my truck the last time I'd gone into town. That changed everything. This wasn't a nosy HOA president anymore. This was surveillance, trespass. A line crossed so far you needed binoculars to see it. Rick had a friend trace the device, and by the next morning we had confirmation shell account purchased sure, but shipped straight to the Whisper Pines management office. Karen wasn't knocking on the fence anymore. She was trying to crawl under it. That night the trail cam pinged my phone around midnight. 2 figures at the lower gate, flashlights cutting through the dark. One was Karen, I knew that scarf by then. The other looked like one of her rent-a-cops. They moved along the fence, pointed at the camera, then the feed went black. Rick was already pulling on his boots. We went down armed, not because we wanted to fight, but because when people start sneaking around your property in the middle of the night, you don't walk in blind. We found them near my well intake. Karen was bent over the lock, like she was trying to force it. Rick called out, first voice flat as stone, "You've got 10 seconds. She froze. The guy with her took one step back. Then Karen straightened up and started talking fast, saying my water system drew from a shared watershed, saying she had a right to inspect it, saying public safety, community standards, all the usual nonsense she used whenever she needed to decorate a lie. I told her she was done pretending. She left, but not before I saw it in her face, that nasty little shift when somebody realizes intimidation isn't working, so they start thinking about sabotage. Back at the cabin, Rick said what I'd already started to fear. She's trying to make this place unlivable. The next day proved it. First came a fake condemnation notice zip-tied to a tree near my gate. Then a forged zoning letter telling me I had 72 hours to vacate pending administrative review. Administrative review by who? The Kingdom of Karen. They'd literally made up a board. The paper wasn't even good quality. I called my lawyer. She told me not to move an inch and to document absolutely everything. Then just when I thought the circus had reached capacity, a landscaping crew showed up in a Ford F350, claiming they'd been hired to grade part of my land for erosion control under a greenbelt buffer plan. They had a work order, a fake one, HOA logo, scanned crooked off a PDF, no parcel number, no seal, nothing but fraud, wrapped in fluorescent safety vests. They backed off quick when I told them they were trespassing, but now the pattern was obvious. Karen was building a paper trail, sending other people onto my land, hoping one of 2 things would happen. Either she'd slowly fake enough management activity to claim control later, or I'd lose my temper on camera and hand her a victim story. That was the twist in the whole mess, the ugly genius of it. She wasn't just trying to bully me. She was trying to manufacture a version of reality where I looked like the dangerous one. And once I saw that, everything snapped into focus. That night, someone cut one of Rick's trip lines. We moved fast lights off boots, quiet on the dirt. Halfway down the hill, we caught them 2 figures in dark hoodies, one carrying a bucket. When I smelled the air, my blood turned to ice. Diesel. They were pouring accelerant onto my brush pile 20 yards from the propane line. I stepped hard on a branch and let it crack like a gunshot. They bolted, but not before the trail cam caught both faces, Karen and one of her people. Attempted arson? That was the night the whole thing stopped being HOA drama and started becoming a criminal case. Deputy Mullen came up in person, took one look at the bucket, one look at the footage, and said he was moving it up the chain. By morning, the county fire marshal and an arson investigator were standing in my yard, stone-faced, bagging evidence, while the smell of fuel still hung in the trees. Then Rick made a phone call. And here's where the story really turned. By the next morning, a black SUV rolled up the trail, followed by a flatbed. Out stepped a man in a charcoal suit with a briefcase and a state badge clipped to his belt. James Coulter, Arizona Attorney General's Office, Environmental Crimes and Community Corruption Division. Rick finally looked at me and gave a little shrug like surprise. Turns out my quiet old army buddy hadn't just come to the mountain for fresh air. He'd stayed quiet because he was waiting to see how deep this rot went. And by then it had gone plenty deep. Coulter laid it all out on my kitchen table, forged annexation maps, fake environmental complaints, falsified records sent to county offices claiming my land had already been absorbed into Whisper Pines jurisdiction. Karen and her board weren't freelancing. They were running a scheme. Slow-motion land theft dressed up as regulation. And now they'd gotten sloppy. The forged letters, the tracker, the landscaping stunt, the attempted arson. All of it together painted a picture so ugly even the state couldn't ignore it. That evening, the Attorney General's office raided the HOA headquarters. Boxes of documents, emails, payment records, handwritten notes, plans to pressure isolated property owners into selling cheap or leaving. Whisper Pines hadn't been preserving the forest. They'd been trying to eat it. Karen didn't go quietly. Of course she didn't. She locked herself inside her house, blasted some pre-recorded speech through outdoor speakers about sovereignty and political persecution, and screamed about tyranny until officers pulled her out in handcuffs through a broken sunroom window. The HOA treasurer went down, so did the vice president. Their so-called compliance officer folded almost immediately. And you know what I felt? Not triumph, not at first. Relief. Real relief is quieter than revenge. It sounds like a gate not rattling at midnight. It sounds like your dog lying down without growling. It sounds like wind in the trees instead of tires on gravel. The legal mess kept going for a while. A few former board members tried slapping me with nuisance lawsuits, but my attorney buried those so fast the judge practically did it with the gavel still warm. Then the grand jury came back with felony indictments, fraud, forgery, conspiracy, corruption, racketeering. Karen's bail got revoked. One board member flipped. 2 local officials got pulled in after money trails surfaced through a dummy LLC owned by Karen's sister. That was the part that stayed with me most. People always think greed looks dramatic. They imagine some cartoon villain twirling a mustache in a leather chair. But most greed looks organized. It wears a pressed blouse, prints fake letterhead smiles at community meetings, and tells itself it's doing what's best for everybody. That's the dangerous kind, the kind that doesn't just steal land or money, but starts believing control is the same thing as righteousness. A month later, I sat in court when Karen was found guilty on all counts. She never looked at me. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe by then even she knew this whole thing had started because she saw one old cabin outside her little kingdom and couldn't stand the idea that something existed beyond her reach. The judge gave her 10 years. No parole. When I got back to the mountain after all that, the place felt like itself again. The fence stood where it should. The creek kept moving. The porch creaked under my boots like it always had. I walked to the gate and replaced the old sign with a bigger one. Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Then underneath it, just because I'd earned the right, I added one more line. Not an HOA member. Never will be. I stood there a second looking at that sign, smelling cedar and dust and cold metal, and I had one of those rare little moments where life tells you the truth without dressing it up. Some people don't want peace, they want permission to dominate. And when they can't own you, they'll try to provoke you into destroying yourself for them. Sometimes the smartest fight isn't the loudest one. Sometimes winning is just refusing to become the monster they were counting on. Still, I'll admit it, seeing Karen hauled off in cuffs felt pretty damn satisfying. So let me ask you this, when somebody abuses power for years and finally gets crushed by the law, is that justice or just karma showing up late? Drop your take in the comments. Who was right? Who crossed the line? And have you ever dealt with an HOA neighbor or local bully who thought they were untouchable until reality hit back?